the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. I have a lot of people ask me a lot of questions about my religion, and of course I've been talking about my new book I've been working on for a while, The Politics of Heaven, making pitches so people can understand why and what it is and why now. There's this continuing problem that I find very fascinating, and when I talk about religion, I happen to be obsessed with righteousness. So in the Bible and in the pursuit of Yahweh's story and Jesus and the what you find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I love the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're chronicles of righteousness written in the second Temple period, a period I love a lot, and I think I'd get along really well with the Essenes from the Second Temple period. I love those who are in love with righteousness, and that's why I was reading this really wonderful book by St. Augustine. I think it's very interesting that in Florida, at St. Augustine, yes, the city in Florida is named after this guy who wrote this book in 420 A.D., City of God. I think it's one of the great classics, and I happen to love this book. I love every word in it. It's a big book. Written over a long period of his life, over 20 years. But it hits on things I find a lot of passion for. Definitely is a study and a defense of righteousness as righteousness emerged in Christian religion. Obviously, I'm very interested in Christian religion. I love this book, too. Great book. 3,000 years of Christianity, the evolution, the mechanics of it, why it's important, what it does for societies in general. Why I'd say it's a very well studied book. But I wanted to read again this City of God by St. Augustine before I got headlong into a really deep dive on Christianity in general, because it's going to be a topic that's going to come up with my book, The Politics of Heaven, a lot. When you do press and media stuff for it, it's certainly going to be a topic on everybody's mind. Disclosure, what's it mean for people? And one of my prevailing concerns is this whole idea of giants, biblical giants, as they come out in the narrative. Why is it a conspiracy? Why is there so much institutionalized anxiety about giants in the Bible? And I thought it was very interesting. I just recently went to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. To kind of examine their theory of Darwinian evolution and see how it plays out in their museum. And anybody who knows me knows I love museums. My favorite places on earth are museums and zoos, places that are smart and they're trying to educate people. I love those places. I don't know if I've ever been to a museum I haven't liked, because the attempt is to say, hey, we found something really cool. Here it is. Come see it. And then here's some information that's supposed to propose more knowledge. So I obviously love the Smithsonian. I love the National Geographic Museum. I grew up reading National Geographic every issue that came out. I loved National Geographic. So I'm not happy to see that they're pretty close-minded to these giants and these giant skeletons that were found in mounds all over the Ohio River Valley. From where I am, at my house, very close by, there's a lot of mounds, and in those mounds, it's been reported that very giant people were found in them. So these giants, these large people, a whole generation of very large people, and they were chronicled in the Bible. You read the Bible, you'll read a lot about giants in the Bible, giant bones, giant people. So I was really, I don't know why it wasn't talked about, but giant discussions, whether it's the Smithsonian, They just don't want to deal with it. There's no evidence, they say, and there's lots of evidence. And why the big squash on all that evidence? And I think you start getting into that when you start dealing with disclosure and you start dealing with aliens and different. There's a report out right now. There's 4 different species of aliens that have been interacting with our government. I can tell you, I've read a lot of conspiracy books over the years, and that's been the statement that's been along with them for a very long time. And this, I'm making a legitimate pitch for a truly, and everybody who's read it has said it. My book, The Politics of Heaven, I would, I take it as a very serious entry. If I'm going to sit down and write a book, I'm going to write a book that adds something to literature. And my idea of literature is books like this. Books like St. Augustine, which they named a city in Florida after him when the Spanish found it. And that's the origin, supposedly, of the Fountain of Youth. And I'll get into that in a minute because I'm very interested in St. Augustine. And I love that coast all the way up and down. I've told stories about a family condo that we've had down there for years. And we love to go to Port Canaveral. The condo is in Port Canaveral. And very near there, they discovered the Wendover site, the Wendover people, which I've talked about a lot. And I made a whole chapter in my book, The Politics of Heaven, about the Wendover people, found 8,000 years ago. I'll get to that in a minute. But what's interesting is this is just 100 miles down the coast from St. Augustine, where this site was found. And the lore that the Spanish had of a fountain of youth at that particular location, I think, goes back to probably descendants from Atlantis, whatever Atlantis was. We know about Atlantis because Plato wrote about it. It was passed down through the Egyptians. This mythical city, was it real or not? I don't know. I know that there's literature and people had beliefs about it. And again, what's important, and the reason I wrote my book, The Politics of Heaven, isn't just to go pitch it. There's a lot of ways to make money. I'm interested in uncovering things that are significant. And I consider this work by St. Augustine, a person I think a lot of. This book, City of God, is one of my favorites. I just love it. And I love Christian studies. I love the Bible for its studies on righteousness. I love righteousness. I love the Dead Sea Scrolls because they talk a lot about righteousness and how corrupt the church became and how the righteous had to stand up to it. You have to be a lover of righteousness. And St. Augustine talks a lot about being a lover of righteousness. And just about every page of this book, it's an extraordinary book. And I just adore it, soak it up. I just love it. And that's generally the case with all Christian studies. 3,000 years of Christianity, why does it matter? Because it defined the mechanism of identifying righteousness in a culture and why you want to pursue that, why you want righteousness in your culture. How's it good for building a healthy civilization? It's a critical element to any kind of endeavor. You got to have an understanding of righteousness and want people who love it, so they want to protect it and preserve it. And I happen to be obsessed with righteousness. I love righteousness. That's why I like the Bible so much, because it's a book dedicated to the perpetuation of righteousness in human cultures. And then when St. Augustine wanted to defend that with the collapse of the Roman Empire, they were blaming Christianity for their failed empire falling apart. Look what you did to us, they basically said to the Christians emerging. St. Augustine wrote this book to defend Christianity in 420 AD. What's important about that is I ran across, I thought it was truly remarkable. It's almost as big as the Wendover discovery, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment. That's why I find it very interesting. They said that just 100 miles north of the Wendover archaeological site, the Spanish named this city, St. Augustine, Florida, after the guy who wrote this book, because it meant so much to him. But here's this is, and I love the Penguin Publishing Company. And again, when I'm pitching my book, I'm pitching it in a very serious literary way. But my interest in this giant thing is, why do human cultures conspire to conceal knowledge? Because they clearly have. They clearly have. When you look at modern politics with COVID, there's a lot of talk about Dr. Fauci and what he knew and when he knew it, and the lab leak out of Wuhan, and why was it concealed by all these tech companies and so many publishers and news outlets. I'm certainly not doing myself any favor by aligning with what they call kooks out there. But and I pitched my Politics of Heaven as a serious work of literature because I love books. My favorite thing in the world are books. So if I'm going to do something that's going to contribute in a significant way, I'm looking at people like St. Augustine to do so. This is my idea of what a book is. Something that really lasts and grabs a hold of people, and they talk about it for thousands of years. I think the City of God is a tremendous effort, literature-wise. But when we talk about all these conspiracies about giants, and they say no one's ever found these giants, that there's no record of them. And again, you go to the Smithsonian, and I talk to people at the Smithsonian, they're like, oh, you're one of those guys. Yeah, that we have all the giant bones hidden in the basement of the Smithsonian, and we're concealing them to drive some narrative about Indians, and it's all politically bound. And I say there's a lot of. It's not such a conspiracy. There is a conspiracy about hiding the giants and where they came from. And I think when you start opening and unraveling disclosure and talking about human governments interacting with these various alien species for years and trading information, trading leadership, the desire to appease these entities. I always say World War II was an occult war. And who says that what Hitler was trying to do was appeal to the gods of ancient, and really trying to sum up the various UFO reportings that have been taking place for many years, and the occupants of those UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call them, and making deals with them to bring power and technology that gives you power over your rivals. Clearly that's been going on for quite some time. So I'm always interested to hear what people think from it's a time capsule, 640, A Defense of Christianity in 620 AD, by a guy that was trying to say the Roman Empire it was great for the role of righteousness in society, that the Roman Empire fell apart, and thank God Christianity came along to replace it. And here's the book that says, here's my thesis on why righteousness is good through Christianity. And I think St. Augustine did a great job defending Christianity at a time when everyone wanted to throw rocks at it. And because of him, Christianity got a foothold that many people benefit from to this day. But I ran across this on page 610, the Penguin version of it. Listen to this. Talking about giants. He says, he himself, this is 620 AD or a little bit before, because this is when the book was published. He took all these books and he wrote lots of chapters and put them all together into one master book, 620 AD. And he says, on the shore of Utica, I myself saw, and I was not alone. He had people with him. Now this is 420 AD. So this is live testimony of someone who found a giant. And these giants have been, who found graves and mounds and tombs that have long been opened up and washed away. You see that there's a lot of reverence for giants in Mesopotamian lore, certainly Egyptian lore. You look at the hieroglyphics and you see giants, compared next to normal-sized people. There's a lot of references to giants, not just in the Bible. But this desire to erase it, almost as if the tampering of another species of life form that manipulated these creatures to be so large, is something that is desperately being concealed. Much the way the COVID coming out of the Wuhan lab is being concealed in modern times. And the lessons learned from various public relations firms who have learned how to manipulate mass society in ways that are detrimental, obviously take their victories from the past and to use them for the future to If you want to conceal something from the mass public, like the origins of a bioweapon that was created through gain-of-function research and funded by governments trying to overthrow elected representation in the United States, and you have the enemies of America playing their part, China, and then everybody wants to go into a deep conspiracy mode and conceal that information, where would they learn that they could get away with it? And I think that's at the core of this whole giant conspiracy. Why wouldn't we openly talk about all these giants? And so there's always this talk about, well, we don't have any proof. And you have lots of proof, lots of newspaper reports, and they say, well, those newspaper reports in the 1800s, late 1800s, prior to the 20th century, they were inspired by sensationalism, a kind of a Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus kind of atmosphere, a Buffalo Bill, Wild West show view of trying to rob Indians of their birthright, take away their indigenous status with guilty Europeans who have migrated from Europe and taken the land of the Indians away from them. Poo-poo on that Christopher Columbus for bringing all those crazy Europeans to the New World. My argument is that the history that we've unleashed was lazy, and it was narrative driven, trying to fulfill a Darwin mindset. And yeah, this is something that I plan to talk about extensively over the years to come. And one of the reasons why I'm writing The Politics of Heaven, because I think this is, I want to defend history, much the way that St. Augustine wanted to defend Christianity from the fallen Roman Empire. They wanted to blame all their inefficiency problems on the emergence of Christianity. But Christianity was long, when you follow the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is why I'm obsessed with the Dead Sea Scrolls. I love the Dead Sea Scrolls. I love the teacher of righteousness, 100 years before Jesus Christ. And John the Baptist, and obviously they were John the Baptist and the Essenes and the Qumran community hanging out in the outskirts of Jerusalem, where they said the temple was corrupted, and they wanted to pursue righteousness, and they had a school dedicated to righteousness. I love it. I could see it, and Christianity was going to come about one way or the other, as an act of rebellion against tyranny, out of a human need for righteousness. I think when you have St. Augustine defending that emergence to the extent that he did in this great book, City of God, my efforts at literature are along the same lines. It's pretentious to say I expect to be as good as what this book was to history, but setting forth and putting out the work itself, that would be my intent, would be to leave something to the world that is significant, and not just to make an argument to make a few bucks. It's to leave something that the world will cherish for thousands of years into the future. While we're colonizing Mars and we're colonizing moons around Jupiter, I want my book, The Politics of Heaven, to speak to somebody sitting on one of those barren planets, reading it in the traditional way, and thinking about the need for righteousness as we colonize planets in the solar system and outside the solar system. I think there's a need for that, to understand how various species of alien interactions have been visiting in a historic sense, and the DNA from that swap out made giant people. And it appears to be, to keep that whole disclosure thing a secret, or a plot device to eradicate it, you have organized governments that have said, we're going to not acknowledge, we're not going to give any funding to anybody who goes out there talking about these giants. But here it is in City of God, 420 AD, and he says, I saw myself on the shore of Utica, and I was not alone, but in the company of several others, a human molar so immense that if it had been cut up into 100, that the size of the molar, the human molar, it could have been cut up into 100 regular teeth that from you and I. from our size. And the reports of tombs that were discovered, ancient tombs in 420 AD that had emerged from rising or falling sea levels that were offshore somewhere, and all of a sudden now people could see inside them, and they saw these very large people. They filled the pages of legends. Homer certainly in the Odyssey was writing about them. They didn't come just out of nowhere. They were contemplated from myth and legend, and bones that they had found from previous cultures. A lot of those cultures haven't made it to our eyes these days, but why is that? And I would say one of the reasons I've dedicated an entire chapter to the Wendover people is because I see that as the missing link. I want to see, one thing I want my book to do is, even though a lot of archaeologists will probably be very upset with it, it brings up a lot of stuff that's been, because it's a long story, and I have a lot of history with this story. Is one of the reasons I do these blog casts is I started off doing these kinds of things on corporate radio, on WLW radio. And I got a good taste of how corporate radio was. And when they decided, and I'm not a big fan of corporations in general, because the authenticity is usually the first victim of them. It's a group consensus. They mostly are creations of socialism and Marxism, corporations, corporate culture. And when they take over radio stations, they take over the press, publishing industry, it's very hard to get them to say, we were trying to control a narrative, and in the field of archaeology, that narrative gets controlled through funding. You don't get donors to your projects if you're out there talking about crazy stuff like, hey, I found a giant in this tomb in the middle of Tennessee somewhere. Nope, that's one way to get you canceled. They're going to say, you violated NACPRA. You got to give those bones back to the Indians. The Cherokee, they were in the area when we found them. So you took the land from them, and any burial you find there must be theirs. But these are giant bones that are 8-9 feet tall. They don't seem to be related to the Cherokee Indians or anybody else from that region or from Ohio. It's the Shawnee, the Lakota, the Sioux. You find some bones when you're digging up for a new housing development, and you find a giant thigh bone. You got to give it back to some Indian tribe that was in the region when humans discovered them post Christopher Columbus. So that becomes a whole thing, and nobody turns in bones anymore because they don't want to go through the hassle of all the violations, the NACPRA violations. Native American Graves Repatriation Act, put forth in 1990, and I've talked extensively about why that's a bad thing. It's not good for indigenous people. The indigenous people argument is purely political. It's meant to design this whole America shouldn't exist argument from the radical left, and all the musings of it are designed to conceal and to construct a narrative. Then that narrative structure gets perpetuated by the funding structure of archaeological digs. So I want to see archaeologists get funded for more digs. I love them. I love reading their work. I talk about my favorite magazine, periodical that I get is Biblical Archaeology Review. Hands down, my favorite thing. When I get one in the mail, I often stop what I'm doing and take a couple hours and just go through it. It's my favorite thing. I would like to see archaeologists get a lot more money, get a lot more celebrity status for what they do. And I'd like to help any way I can. And one way I'd like to do that is to draw more attention through my book, the Politics of Heaven. I want to bring more contemplation towards the good archaeology that was done at the Wendover site. It's such a light cover that it's hard to see it because they picked this baby blue color. But it's this is a hardback, very academic version, put out by Florida State University, the University Press of Florida. I look at it as one of my greatest treasures in my books. I adore it. But here's the deal. And again, we talk about that family condo in Cape Canaveral. There is very few real good family memories that I have, other than going down to, there's a popular pizza place in Cape Canaveral, down the road from Kennedy Space Center, at the condo complex that my family has interacted with for a great number of years. There's very little good in the world better than getting a pizza down at that pizza place, bringing it back to the condo, and sitting on the balcony and looking out over the ocean and eating pizza and sipping Mellow Yellow, my favorite soft drink. Nothing, I don't think there's anything better in the entire world than that combination of things. But I often have looked out over from that balcony at the condo, and it's the same vantage point as you'd get in St. Augustine, the city, Florida coast in general. The Wendover people were found in what was pretty much a highland for them, a bog area in Titusville, just around the corner from Kennedy Space Center, right up the road. When you, instead of turning into the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center, you just keep on going down the road and you'll run into this bog site where they found the Wendover people 8,000 years ago. Well preserved. I've done a lot of coverage on it. I dedicated an entire chapter to my book. And the archaeology done here was great, chronicled in this book. And what they found essentially were giant bones. Not giants like we're talking about, where you take a molar from one of these giant human skulls that St. Augustine's talking about here in City of God. He said he saw it himself with witnesses. And this is, I consider, one of the best historic records out there. I mean, there wasn't any Smithsonian conspiracy at that time. You know, when he wrote this book in 420 AD, he had no reason to say, hey, I found a bunch of giants. I've witnessed giant bones myself. And a molar that you could have cut, if you cut it into 100 parts, you could have cut it into 100 human teeth, because it was that big. That's how big this skull was, this skeleton, these teeth, this human molar that was found. So when we talk about giants from the Bible, I don't see a conspiracy. I think the proof is, they say, where's the proof? The proof is in places like Wendover. Wendover, how many sites are there like Wendover, where it was accidentally found by building a housing development? When I talk about sitting on that condo, that balcony, eating that pizza and drinking a Mellow Yellow, a lot of people go to these coasts. A lot of people know Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, because of the Kennedy Space Center. They know about Ron John Surf Shop. So a lot of people find themselves going out there while they have trips to Disney World. They go to the coast, go to the beach. Cocoa Beach is their beach. They go to the Ron John Surf Shop because it's so popular. Most popular in the world. And the pizza place I'm talking about is right around the corner from Ron John's. Pretty interesting. Good interesting place. I like that. I love the area. But you have to know something about time. And it was premature, the history we gave. And the proof of it is these Wendover people. It was a very advanced culture in Florida at that time, 8,000 years ago, that had advanced religions, knowledge of preserving the dead, and the ability to make very delicate clothing articles. Almost as sophisticated as this hoodie I have on from the wonderful Museum of the Bible, one of my favorite places in the world. I talk about museums. I love the Museum of the Bible because it's a museum dedicated to literature studying righteousness. It's dedicated to righteousness. One of the greatest places, I think, on earth, the Museum of the Bible. But the Wendover people were making sophisticated textiles, almost to the delicate weaving as you see on this hoodie. Where'd they learn all that from? And I would say, well, that's legends of Atlantis, passed down over many thousands of years. They fled a catastrophe, and they found themselves in Florida. How do we know? Because Florida, they preserved themselves in Florida. They were larger than average, as this book chronicles. They're higher than larger people than what you think of indigenous people being in the Archaic period. These people were like the size we are now, which is pretty big for people of that era, that generation. There's video evidence that there's thigh bones that produce people as high as 7 feet, even though they don't mention them in this book. I would expect the people from Florida State University, if they had giant bones that size, they would have put them in their book unless they were worried about getting their funding pulled. That's the kind of stuff I want to help archaeologists do, is bring some adventure to their field and bring money with it to get them funded so they can get more and discover more, because there's a lot of Wendover sites that need to be found. So when you're on that condo balcony that I was talking about, eating that pizza, and I've talked about this for years, but when you're looking out over the horizon and it goes all the way out there, and you get the moon's out, and you see all the cruise ships leaving Port Canaveral, disappearing, going to the Bahamas. They go out the channel, and they go way over the curvature of the earth. The shoreline back then, when Wendover was a thing, when Wendover had their civilization there at the Wendover site, it was a cemetery, they were burying their dead there. We know now in the Gulf area, Gulf of America, on the Gulf side, Tampa, Fort Myers, down by the Everglades, around Key West, that whole region would have been above water during 8,000 years ago. Everybody talks, the liberals talk about climate change. The ocean level was 400 feet lower at the time, because during the Ice Age, a lot of ice locked up the water level, and the water tables everywhere around the world were, I often say, I think Garden of Eden is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. All those rivers they talk about converged under the current Persian Gulf, because the Persian Gulf would have been above sea level. Just like the Atlantic coast, when you're on that condo, if we were in that same condo 8,000 years ago and you're looking out, you'd see a vast plain for 12 miles off the coast of Florida on the Atlantic side, 25, 30, 50 miles, 100 miles on the Gulf side. Long time. A lot of open land, and there's a lot of discoveries now. There's mounds, Indian mounds, underneath that shallow water in the Gulf. If you've ever been to Tampa, Florida, which everybody knows, I love the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I love Tampa, Florida. It's one of my favorite cities. If you've ever seen a hurricane come through, that storm surge soaked up all that water, and you've seen the whole Tampa Bay get emptied till it's dry, you can walk across it. That happens quite a lot, actually. It happened just a few years ago, where so much water got pulled up into the core of the storm. Storm surge was 15 feet high, 12 feet, 15 feet high. Some of these category 4 hurricanes soaks up so much water into it that it pulled water away from the shoreline, and then you reveal a whole bunch of stuff that's buried underneath it. And what we found is that there's mounds and development, and surely in those mounds you have giant bones, as reported by St. Augustine. Same deal. All you got to do is dig into them and tell us what you find there, just like with Wendover. Wendover, they found well-preserved bodies, 8,000 years old, with brain tissue intact. And their DNA structure did not match up to any known indigenous people. So that's a problem. That's a thing. There's a lot more study that needs to go on over the Wendover people, which I hope in my book, the Politics of Heaven. It's good to say the Gunfighter's Guide to Business. I have a lot of books. I get to get them all. I talk about them all. This one is different in that I'm looking at it in a literary way that isn't just an extension of my blog and my video testimony, my experience with corporate media, where I said, I had such a bad experience with corporate media and the way they jerk you around. They use you for what they need you to do. And then when you're no longer useful to them, they're throwing you out there to the wolves. And I wasn't real happy with that whole thing, and I decided I would do my own thing in the future, which is what I've done, which is why I do these. I just do my own media because the media that is out there owned by corporations, corporate media, owned by a few families, have a narrative that they've adhered to. And for some reason, they don't like this talk about giant skeletons. And as I went to the Smithsonian recently with my wife, their adherence to this, it almost seemed like children putting up displays. With what we know about the human race now and sticking to this whole Darwin theory of evolution the way that they did, it's to basically justify a secular view of the world and the evolution of people so that you can avoid talking about this disclosure, this alien interaction that's been going on for as long as history's been around, and that a lot of religions were born out of these interactions with these alien species, about 4 different ones that's coming out in these disclosure reports. It's funny now that these were conspiracy theories for many years, just like with COVID. The lab leak was a conspiracy theory forever, and then now it's being talked about by CIA people testifying on Capitol Hill that it was right, it was true all along. It's not a conspiracy when you start having reliable people provide testimony to the Senate, which is what happened recently. And the same thing's been going on with these 4 species. Apparently Hitler, during World War II, that was an occult war. It was a dedication to the real society and various conspiracy societies that were dedicated to these ancient aliens. And that was their whole reference for occult practices, to drum them up and get them to come see you. And we're finding out that our own governments have been doing that for a long time, and they've been trading technology for whatever is good for these different interactions. And it was conspiracy a few years ago, and now you see it all over Netflix. Now you have official reports coming out from credible people saying, yeah, we saw this and saw that, and we've worked on bodies from crashes, and yeah, it's been going on forever. Now this big Spielberg movie's coming out. Everybody's going to be talking about it, and I wanted to put forth a serious work on talking about what it all means. So that's why I wrote The Politics of Heaven. But one of my desires in that work is to help archaeologists who, because I like to read their work, I like to read their studies, and I want to see them more funded properly. I want to see their stuff get out there so I can read about it, because I don't have the patience to go out there and dig and do all the stuff they do. But I want to pay them to do it. So I want to see that they get more revenue, and I want to bring a little fame and fortune to their cause, even if it causes them, for my beliefs and my thoughts, some consternation, just annoying me. In corporate culture, I've seen that, ran into that all my life. I know what that's all about, and it's hard to do the right things most of the time because so many people are compromised. Again, back to righteousness. That's why I love righteousness so much. Righteousness is a great thing. If you have a righteous society, it wouldn't be so hard. There wouldn't be so many cover-ups and conspiracies and all this stuff. But the Wendover site I look at is very important. St. Augustine's the same deal. If you're at the beach at St. Augustine and you're looking out over the horizon, as far as the eye can see, all you see is ocean. All that water would have been gone. And the Wendover people and probably other tribes of early people, likely descendants of Atlantis and other early societies that were chronicled by the Egyptians and ultimately the Greeks in their works, written about in works of fantasy and fiction, mythology. Obviously, they ended up as stories in Irish folk tales. There's giants all over the world. And in 420 AD, even St. Augustine was talking about them, the city of God. Talks extensively about giants, giant people, people much larger than the people that the earth produces today. So I endeavor to bring some credibility to all that and stir up some discussion that is another gear in intellect. And that's why I think you write books. I think we're a much better society because St. Augustine wrote City of God. I think we're a better society since archaeologists wrote this wonderful book about Wendover. Where's your proof? Your proof is right here. But we need more of this. And right now, marine archaeology knows there's a lot of mounds and similar sites as Wendover off the coast of Florida that are underwater right now, that were above water during the period of the Archaic period, during the Ice Age. And so you had advanced societies, just like the Wendover people, all over those areas. And you really can't make a conclusion about the origin of any human beings or indigenous people until you've explored those regions. And if there's giant bones in those, like I think there are everywhere, then the truth will take you where the truth's going to take you. And you got to deal with it. And if those bones were the descendants of alien interactions, well, then let's deal with it. the evidence takes you there, then let's boldly go there. And that's my premise in the politics of heaven. That's my premise. So when I'm talking to so many people about it, it's easier to do a video to kind of talk to everybody directly. That's why there's a little more effort in this book than other books I've done. I'm looking at this one on a scale of the City of God from St. Augustine, as opposed to just something that might have an appeal to people in a particular decade. I'm looking for something that's going to be relevant for thousands of years. And in so doing, I'd like to see museums get some credit. I like to see archaeologists get some fame and fortune and funding for their projects, and so they can do more great stuff like this great book of Wendover. And why do I want to see that happen? Because I want to read more books like this. I want more work from good archaeologists doing great work and telling me what they find as they spend all those many hours digging in the dirt, doing work that I'm too impatient to do. I wouldn't want to do it, but I thank God that they do. Francis Pryor, one of my favorite, the Time Team from England. I love those guys. I wish we had that in the United States. I wish we had like on the Discovery Channel, like what they have on the Time Team, by Francis Pryor and those guys, where they almost do like a Gordon Ramsay. They go in and fix up old restaurants. They go and do digs in a week and tell you what they learned. And I wish we could do that in the United States. I would love to see that happen. And anything I can do to bring a little fame and fortune to it, I am certainly motivated extensively to do so for my own selfish reasons, because I like reading their work. And I want to see them get more attention. And I want to see us learn and discover more stuff. And I don't want to see us dig into narratives that don't match the truth. And I think that the Wendover people just gives you a hint to that truth. And it's off the coast of Florida, and we have to assume what we know, that a lot of those mounds that were built then, in the alignments we see off the coast, under the water, the current coastline, that has been, that were there before the Ice Age ended. That's where the real hinge point is, because it blows a narrative that so many people have put forth, and they've built entire careers around them, and they've turned out not to be true. The entire Smithsonian presentation of evolution gets wrapped up in all that, even though it's a great museum, and I look at it as a wonderful place to go. It's a wonderful place for education, but it's almost like the exhibits were done by children, because the intellect isn't there. It hasn't kept up with the discoveries that we've made since the Smithsonian was enacted. And they need to get with the program and understand what's being discovered out there. And when you say, where's the proof? Well, the proof's at the Wendover Archaeological Site. And on page 610, in this version of the City of God, witnessed by St. Augustine himself. Not a lot of motivation for him to lie about it, because at the time it wasn't such a conspiracy. It was just a defense of Christianity from the Roman Empire, and validating that the giants talked about in the Bible so extensively, actually the remnants of their bodies were being found even at that time in a great abundance, and written about in this book, City of God. Incredible. Page 610 for anybody who wants to look it up. I think it's one of the most important things. That and this Wendover site. There's a couple of the greatest evidence there is towards that people used to be a lot bigger on the earth at a certain period of time, which is evidence against a secular view that wants to eradicate the Bible and all its righteousness from humankind in general, for purposes of maliceness, in the destruction of the human race in general, by removing value systems from them that are good for them, which is a pursuit of a righteous lifestyle through Christianity, through the study of it, through the history of it. And the giants are traces of that faulty past that you can dig up and find, which terrifies secular people to this day, because it lets them know there's something greater than them. That's the same problem you have. That's why China doesn't have great archaeological digs going on, because they don't want any history that predates their communist takeover from Mao Zedong. It's all about looking forward and who's in charge now, not who was in charge in the past. They don't care. They just rather erase the past and not let anybody study it, which is where we find ourselves with this giant conspiracy and its relationship to UFOs and UAPs and crop circles and all kinds of things that are not so crazy now, starting to sound a lot more relevant and being talked about by the mainstreamers in corporate media out of all places. But that's the trend we're all headed. And, when I do something like the politics of heaven, I'm doing it to try and help people bridge that gap as they get shocked by the information they're going to start getting in this modern age of disclosure. It's a real psychological drain on a lot of people who have built their entire existence around thinking something else, and all of a sudden now they have different information. And a hint to that is the sites like this Wendover site in Florida, and knowing that there's lots of such sites, those beaches that everybody's swimming around in Cocoa Beach, you can go out as far as you can go, and all that water was gone 8,000 years ago. And underneath that were villages of people who had very sophisticated societies, as evidenced by the Wendover burials inland quite a ways, where they put their people in bogs. They're close to the shore now because only the ocean levels rose 400 feet to where they are today. Pretty compelling. Good stuff. Obviously, I enjoy talking about this topic probably more than any other topic. And City of God is a great book. And all books that study Christianity in depth are wonderful for the tools of intellect and why the pursuit of righteousness is so important in the human race. And you really can't live without it. So here's another good one. If you like reading and you like the subject, these are great books to dig into. I love The City of God by St. Augustine. Great defense of Christianity against a bunch of pagan Romans who were upset that they lost power and were trying to blame it on Christianity. Wonderful book. Wonderful defense of Christianity and City of God at a time when everything was still new. 420 AD. And in that book, on page 610, St. Augustine says he saw himself, a human molar that could have been cut up 100 times into the teeth of our own molars. Because the people at the time of these bodies that they were finding in these tombs, as they were eroding away from ancient times, at that time they were already 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old, and the world produced a lot of big people at the time. And the evidence is actually well chronicled. It's just we haven't had the guts to admit to it. And when we do get something that goes against what we believe, we erase it, such as what happened with Wendover. And we did it with Law and Order, with NACPRA law, where if you find a bone, you got to give it back to a Native American tribe that probably isn't even affiliated because it predates their entry into North America by thousands of years. And that's what we have to come to terms with. It's a lot to talk about. That's why you write books, good books, and that's what I intend with the politics of heaven, something that goes to the next layer and gets people thinking about things in the right way, on a sophisticated level, as opposed to just a popcorn eater. It has that too, of course. I mean, I don't think I'm capable of writing something that's not a thrill a second type thing. But yeah, I mean it with all the seriousness that you can mean with literature, and the role that literature has traditionally played in the human race, and for all those reasons, and all those lofty reasons. It's why it's important to do, and that's why I'm doing it. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
In the age of disclosure, you must understand the politics of heaven. Coming soon. Coming soon, the politics of heaven in 2027. A treasure hunt through heaven and all human history.